The game of death. They ran, they tripped, they stumbled. Their legs had grown fatigued by the constant running, each laborious step feeling like shackles dragging at their legs. And yet, they continued to flee. There was no other choice. Their pursuers hunted them in armored hovercrafts, while they had to trek over rough terrain on foot. They had no weapons and wore only rags that did nothing to contest the cold winds. Meanwhile, their hunters had rifles and machetes, as well as the mounted turrets on board the hovercraft. An unfair advantage, but that wasn't part of the game. It wasn't supposed to be fair. This was more than just a game after all. It was divine punishment. The only leeway they'd been given was a day's head start. The rules were simple: 5 checkpoints, 5 prisoners. The wronged and families of their victims had weapons, hovercrafts, and trackers. The prisoners had nothing but their wits. Escape to the final checkpoint meant 5 years in a cell. Capture meant death, slow, ugly, and televised. The crowd had to be entertained after all. Cameras mounted on drones followed the prisoners, while a camera crew rode alongside the families, getting interviews and developing a sympathetic character arc for the viewers. It was not long after leaving the 3rd safe zone when Patton broke his ankle. The 5 men had been traversing rocky terrain with punishing slopes and hidden potholes. In a cruel twist of irony, the usually cautious Patton had jumped from a small ledge and his foot had slid between 2 rocks. With the momentum of his fall and his full weight behind it, his ankle had snapped with an audibly sickening crack. His scream had echoed for miles, drawing the attention of the drones that swarmed about the group like flies about a corpse. He had passed out immediately afterwards and wasn't conscious when Harper, Quaker, and Hill pried him from the rocks and laid him down. "Shit, that's bad," Quaker said, shuddering as they examined Patton's injuries. The bone hadn't pierced through the skin, but it was pressing against it, jutting out at a weird angle. Hill vomited. The others grimly avoided looking at the stomach-churning injury. "We'll have to carry him," said Harper, looking from Patton to the distant landscape, as if planning a safe route through the unforgiving terrain. "Are you crazy, man?" Dickinson exclaimed, looming over Harper aggressively while glancing fearfully at the circling drones. "We got to leave him." "They'll butcher him when they find him," Harper snarled, already beginning to raise Patton to a sitting position. "And they'll butcher us after he slows us down," Dickinson retorted. "I ain't going out like that." "Help me carry him, damn it," Harper insisted. Dickinson was a big, brutish man, but Harper wasn't easily intimidated. "Fuck you," Dickinson sneered, turning and beginning to clamber away over the rocks. Harper looked at the others. "Are you gonna help me?" he demanded. Hill avoided his eye while Quaker sighed and crouched next to Harper, but he didn't make a move to help Patton. "Dickinson's right, Harper," he said in his slow, uncomplicated manner. "They'll catch us for sure if we have to lug him around. Kill me." They all looked down. Patton was awake. His face was pale and slick with sweat. His breathing was labored and raspy. "I get it. You can't take me with you. Just don't let them get to me. Please, I'm fucking begging you. Don't let them get to me alive." Hill, who was the youngest of the group, looked at the other men uncertainly, waiting for one of them to make a decision. Quaker kept his eyes locked on Harper, one eyebrow slightly raised questioningly. Harper's face went through an array of emotions before he sighed and nodded. "All right, Patton," he said in a hollow voice, patting the doomed man comfortingly on his shoulder. He turned to the others. His expression was unreadable. "You two catch up with Dickinson. I'll be there in a minute." He picked up a rock while Patton closed his eyes. "Thanks, Harper," Patton said with an effort. His face was completely drained of color, but he mustered a feeble smile. Hill and Quaker hurried away. They didn't see the mercy killing, but they heard Harper's grunts of exertion and the wet, thudding sounds of a rock obliterating a skull. Hill was the one to notice Patton didn't scream. He made no noise whatsoever. After a moment, a blood-soaked Harper hurriedly rejoined the group, and they continued in silence. It took them a day and a half to reach the fourth safe zone. By then, they were sleep-deprived and thirsty, barely hanging on to their sanity. They resembled beasts as they shambled along, too exhausted to walk upright. The sparse cabin was practically luxurious compared to roughing it in the wilderness. They only had the maximum duration of a day to rest, though the longer they stayed, there was more of a risk of the families catching up to them sooner. The families couldn't enter the cabin, but the moment the prisoners stepped foot beyond the threshold, they were fair game. There was dried blood on the threshold of the door and on a wall. Someone had scratched graffiti in the dried blood with the eerie message, "Don't rest. They'll find you." "Let's get a few hours' sleep," said Harper, stripping off his bloody clothes and washing off the remains of Patton in a small sink. "Shouldn't we take turns keeping watch?" Hill asked, peeking out of a window nervously. "Just get some sleep, kid," Harper said with a sigh of exhaustion. He glanced up to see Quaker watching him. Harper fixed him with a steady glare, not bothering to cover himself. "We're not in the penitentiary now, Quaker," he said. "You don't have your little friends to back you up here, and I ain't a punk. Keep that shit to yourself." "No harm meant, Harper." Quaker raised his hands placatingly. "Was just thinking about Patton. Do you think we could have gotten him here?" Harper paused. "No," he said. He looked over at Dickinson a little resentfully, who had joined Hill to look out of the window. "You were right, Dickinson." Dickinson glared at him. "Are you expecting me to say I told you so?" he growled. "It was just what had to be done. It was just bad luck." "Yeah," said Harper, rubbing a hand across his face. "We've all got shit luck here." They sat down at the small table to share a meal of canned tuna, beans and sausage and water. The cutlery was made from fragile plastic. The organizers of the hunt had thought of every possibility. "I'd feel a lot better if I didn't have to worry about those sons of bitches tracking us," growled Dickinson. He seemed to flinch and glanced towards the window, then glared at the camera mounted in a steel cage in the far corner of the ceiling. "I'd kill for a decent hot meal," Quaker sighed, prodding his food with his fork. There was this small Italian place on the corner back home. It was called Cataneo's. I'd eat my weight in carbonara. "I could just do with a beer," said Harper. "I quit drinking after, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, not like it really matters now. An ice-cold beer. Condensation on the glass and smooth going down." "Amen to that," chuckled Quaker. "My ma used to make a killer roast," Hill said with a timid grin. "I used to drown that shit in gravy." They all laughed. "Yeah, but you know what I miss," Dickinson said, swirling the water around in his cup. "A decent cup of coffee. I used to have the Italian breakfast, coffee and a smoke to start the day. At lunchtime, there was this sandwich place across from work. I always got the grilled cheese sandwich. My ex-wife Liz was on this diet, which meant I was also on this fucking diet, and that sandwich shop was like a little slice of paradise. Funny what you miss when you think about it." "Speaking of something I miss," said Quaker with a grin, "I miss women." There was a collective babble of agreement. "I haven't been laid in years," Dickinson sighed. "As much as I can't stand her, I'd even settle for a couple of hours with Liz." "There was this girl I used to like," said Hill reminiscently. "Never even knew I existed. I still think about her from time to time." "What did she look like?" asked Quaker, leaning forward with interest. "Was she, you know?" He outlined an hourglass figure with his hands. Hill smiled sadly. "Nah, she was kinda petite," he said. "She had frizzy hair and freckles. Real pretty, though." Quaker seemed unsatisfied with his description and snorted. "What about you, Harper?" Dickinson asked, glancing at him. "You got a woman?" Harper sighed. "Nah," he said. "I was married once. Got a couple of kids, too. Lost them, though. She and the kids stopped visiting me a few months after I got locked up. Heard she sold the house and moved away. My kids are probably calling some other prick dad these days." "Yeah," said Dickinson gruffly in a rare display of sympathy. "That's rough." "Ah, they're probably better off without me," Harper said philosophically. "Don't get me wrong, she was no angel, but I let her down one too many times." "Say," Hill said suddenly, addressing all of them with a look, "what'll you do if we make it out of this?" The room went deathly quiet. The others glared at him, and he wilted in his seat. "Sorry," he mumbled. The mood had shifted after that, and the former levity was never recovered. After a few more minutes of forced conversation, they settled down on their bunks. A fifth bunk remained empty, emphasizing the lack of Patton's presence. Some time later, Harper awoke. Something had disturbed him. Dickinson was sitting by the window again, looking out and muttering to himself. "Dickinson," Harper mumbled sleepily. "What are you doing?" "You hear that, Harper?" he said, not turning to look at him. Harper was fully awake in an instant and sprang out of bed. "What?" he said, jostling next to Dickinson. From what he could see, there was nothing outside except the ever-present drones milling lazily around the cabin. "Hunting dogs," Dickinson whispered urgently. "They used to use hounds, you know. Back in the olden days, they'd make this weird sound, not barking or howling, this drawn-out sound as they chased their prey. I can hear it." "That's just the wind," Harper said slowly, watching Dickinson from the corner of his eye. "You need to get some sleep. We gotta move out soon, and we won't get another chance at proper sleep for a while." "Don't fucking patronize me, Harper," Dickinson snapped. He continued to stare out the window while Harper continued to watch him uneasily. "Fuck this. I'm getting out of here." "It's still dark outside," Harper tried to reason with him. "You might break your leg like Patton if you stumble around in the dark. Get some sleep. We'll cover more ground in daylight." "I'm not gonna sit here and wait for those dogs to find me," Dickinson bellowed. Quaker and Hill were startled from their bunks. "What the hell?" Hill squeaked. "Calm down, Dickinson," Harper said, but the bigger man suddenly whirled around and grabbed him by the lapels. "You're already dead, Harper," he roared. "You just don't know it yet. If you want to die like an animal, be my guest." He threw Harper across the room, where he sprawled on the floor. Dickinson hurried for the door, muttering to himself. Hill shrank away from him while Quaker took a step back with both hands raised in surrender. Dickinson yanked open the door, and the room trembled when he slammed it shut behind him. From the window, they watched as he slowly faded into the dark. "Poor bastard," Quaker said, shaking his head. "He's lost it." "Should we go after him?" Hill asked, as Harper got unsteadily to his feet. Harper shook his head while Quaker scoffed. "Have you seen the size of him?" Quaker said, indicating the door Dickinson had left by with a nod of the head. "If you think you can drag his ass back here, give it a try." There was a silence. "We leave at first light," Harper said flatly. He rubbed his shoulder, wincing slightly as he eased himself back onto his bunk. "Maybe he'll make it out before the rest of us." By the tone of his voice, he didn't sound convinced. The old man watched as his companions settled down for the night in the large tents provided by the Death Games organizers. The two large hovercrafts were now parked on the rough ground, looming over the smattering of tents like enormous beetles. The campfires had been extinguished, and the camera crew were packing away their equipment, allowing the drones to continue recording the hunting party. The longer he traveled with them, the more he was disturbed by their behavior. The longer the prisoners evaded them, the more disquieting savagery overcame them, stoked by the performative TV presenter, who asked prying questions about the victims of the prisoners and recounted the manner of their demise or assaults in unnecessary detail for the enjoyment of the viewers. As he settled into his own sleeping bag, the old man's mind drifted to his late son, Damien. Damien had been a good man, a family man. He hadn't deserved to die. But as the old man studied the mood among the hunters, he became certain matters would devolve in a manner Damien wouldn't approve of. The old man lay awake for quite some time after he turned in, staring at the ceiling of his tent. As sleep eventually forced his eyelids to grow heavy, he had reached a conclusion. Until then, he had been conflicted, but now he was determined. He would kill the man who took Damien from him. That was justice. He remembered when he and Damien used to go hunting elk in the forest back home. "A clean shot, boy," he had instructed. "We don't want the animal to suffer. That wouldn't be right. Take a beat, compose yourself, and make the shot count. A clean shot." The old man had considered torturing his son's killer. His mind had been consumed with nothing else at the height of his grief. But now the killer was within his reach. He realized he didn't have it in him to do that, and Damien wouldn't approve. "One clean shot," he murmured sleepily, before turning onto his side and drifting off to sleep. The sun rose a few hours later, and the three remaining men cautiously left the cabin in somber silence. The sense of urgency had heightened. They were approaching safety with only one more checkpoint to go. But the feeling their pursuers were rapidly closing in was palpable. The cold, rocky plains were eventually replaced by foggy marshland. They cautiously navigated bogs and stagnant waters, the impeding landscape slowing them down maddeningly, despite their fear and wish to run at full speed. It took them about 6 hours before they caught up with Dickinson. He had used his tattered jacket as a noose. He hung limply from a twisted tree. His face was purple, and his bloodshot eyes were bulging from his head. They stared at him in horror. "Come on," said Harper. "Let's get him down." Hill helped him climb the tree and unfasten the noose. Quaker sat down by the roots of a nearby tree, looking blankly at the ground. His usual composure had evaporated. As if on an impulse, he sprang to his feet. "Yeah, fuck this," Quaker said, half stumbling and half running away. "Quaker, wait," Harper called after him. "We're better off separating," Quaker yelled. "We'll be harder to track." He fled deeper into the marshland. "Oh shit," Hill said, beginning to panic. He pressed his hands against his temples and began to pace frantically. Harper seized him and shook him hard. "Get a grip," he said, though his own voice shook. "We'll get out of this. Just stick with me." Hill looked at him uncomprehendingly for a moment, looking younger than ever as tears ran down his face. "We gotta go, kid," Harper said kindly. Hill nodded numbly. "Okay, Harper," he said, breathing heavily. "I'm okay now." "It's Daniel," said Harper, releasing Hill. "Friends call me Dan." "Jerry," Hill said. "Well, it's Jeremiah, but you know, I didn't choose it." He laughed nervously, and Harper smiled. "All right," he said. "Let's move." They surged on through the thick mud, at times having to link arms to maintain their balance. At one point, Hill almost got sucked into a bog, and Harper had to lay down on his stomach by the edge and act as a human ladder as Hill clambered out. After a few more hours, they reached an open plain. Far in the distance, they saw a high steel wall with a gate, the final checkpoint. With safety in sight and a fairly even surface to run on, the men continued with renewed vigor. They were almost home free. Then they heard the whine of engines. "Oh, fuck!" Hill screamed. "Run!" Harper yelled. They hurtled forward, sprinting until their legs were cramping and their chests burned. The drones circled around them like vultures, as if eager to capture the fear on their faces. They heard shouts. Harper risked a glance over his shoulder. There were two large hovercrafts, both a dull metallic gray smeared with dust and dirt. A hatch on the lead craft was open, and a man with a grimace of sheer bloodlust was howling maniacally while waving a machete from the opening. Staked by spikes mounted on the roof of the second craft were the naked, mutilated bodies of Patton, Dickinson, and Quaker. Eyes had been ripped out of sockets, genitalia had been burned off, portions of skin had been stripped away, broken limbs were swollen with deep purple bruising, and the crucified bodies were horribly twisted to conform to their mounts. Harper screamed in terror. Then Hill stumbled, retching violently. Harper grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and flung him forward. "Get going," he yelled. "You're almost there." Hill barely had time to look at him in confused astonishment before staggering forward. Harper stopped. His hands were trembling and he felt urine seep down one leg. He glanced up at the drones watching him. He thought of his sons, Kevin and Milo. He hoped they wouldn't see this. Briefly, he thought of Hill. He hoped the kid made it to safety. After all that had happened, he hoped at least one of them made it out alive. Hill was the youngest, with the most to live for. If any of them deserved to make it out of here alive, it was definitely him. They caught up to Harper in no time. Whooping and jeering, they leapt from the hovercrafts and seized him, while the camera crew jostled one another to get a better angle. Blood poured from Harper's open mouth. He had tried to bite off his tongue, but he had only partially bitten through. To Harper's dismay, he was still alive. They rained vicious punches and kicks down on him, while he tried to shield his head as best he could. "Skin the cunt," one of them said, painfully grabbing a handful of flesh on Harper's chest and running his knife across it. They laughed as he screamed. Another was stamping on Harper's legs gleefully, shattering the knees and shin bones. Then a single gunshot rang out and everyone stopped. The old man had fired his pistol into the air. He strode forward, pushing past a couple of his companions. "That's enough," the old man said. He aimed the pistol and shot Harper through the head. Brain matter and pieces of skull splattered on the ground. There were loud protests. "He deserved to suffer," a woman screamed, physically being held back by another man. Her husband seemed just as enraged, needing 2 men and a woman to restrain him. "You let him off easy, old man," the husband scoffed. "He was my kill," the old man said firmly. "Ultimately, it was my choice how he died." He glanced up at the bodies of the other prisoners in disgust. "It ain't right," he muttered to himself. "Damien wouldn't have wanted it like this." He shook his head for a moment before squaring his shoulders. "It's done." "No," the woman wailed, tearing herself free and beginning to savagely kick Harper's body. "He helped him escape. He let that monster escape." Jeremiah Hill gasped with relief and fatigue as he passed through the gates into safety. The guards were waiting for him with rifles raised and handcuffs at the ready. The warden stood in front of a crowd of cameramen and news reporters. They all glared at Hill with hatred and disgust. And no wonder. Hill hadn't lied when he'd told the others he still thought about Maisie Thornbridge. He thought of her now. It had been lucky that none of the other prisoners knew what crimes each of them had committed. They might have killed him themselves if they'd known. He had also been lucky that Harper had taken a liking to him, constantly acting as a protector. All he'd had to do was lean into his youthfulness and apparent naivety. A risky move, as it might have marked him as an easy target. Luckily, Harper was there to look out for the kid. The only survivor this year was the child killer, 19-year-old Jeremiah Hill. One news reporter was addressing the camera. 12-year-old Maisie Thornbridge was abducted on her way home from school last year. Her dismembered body was discovered 4 days later in a river near where she had been abducted. Police tracked down Hill through DNA found at the crime scene and on the victim. Hill didn't hear the rest, as a guard clicked the cuffs on his wrists and he was led away to a police vehicle. He was jostled on all sides as cameras and microphones were shoved towards him while the guards pushed back the shouting crowd. Hill smiled to himself. Only 5 years, and then he really would be free. One question rang out from a reporter. "Do you feel any remorse for the death of Maisie Thornbridge?" He turned to the questioner with a thoughtful expression. Seeing the question had provoked a reaction, the crowd quietened slightly. Even the guards paused. Hill ran his tongue across his lips and smiled as if reliving a happy memory. "Ah, Maisie Thornbridge," he said. "I still think about her all the time.